It's a special bonus episode of the Bird Emergency because it's World Albatross Day. I'm talking to two of the members of the Albatross Task Force. Stick around because there's some really important information about how you can ask some questions of some of the world's top experts on albatrosses. But before you get to that, learn all about the task force and my amazing guests. The Bird Emergency, the podcast about rare, threatened, endangered birds, the people who are trying to help them, and the governments that aren't. Actually, I should probably be more happy about the state of things because it's World Albatross Day. Hooray! It's World Albatross Day. Special, nearly live episode with Nina DaRocha and Steph Prince from the Albatross Task Force. And we're going to talk all about albatrosses. How are you both? Thank you very much for joining me.
Great, thank you. It's really nice to be here and to be celebrating the very first World Albatross Day.
Yeah, excited about what the day will bring and raising awareness about albatrosses around the world.
And we need to do that because they've been battling for so long, but there's some really good news about albatrosses. Now, before we kick right into albatrosses, I'm down here in the southeast corner of Australia. Nina, you're locked down in Portugal.
That's right.
And Steph, which part of the lovely Green Isle of Britain are you in?
I'm just outside of Cambridge, so south.
All right. Now, World Albatross Day, how did it come about and what's it for?
So it was actually one of our colleagues working on Goth Island, which is a tiny little island in the South Atlantic where albatrosses breed. Michelle Jones, she suggested that there should be a World Albatross Day to let people know about albatrosses, the threats they face, and what we can do to help save them. So this idea was presented at a meeting last year to the Agreement of the Conservation of Albatrosses and Petrels, also known as ACAP, and a date was set, and here we are. And hopefully this will carry on for many years to come. This is just the start of it.
Now, you're both Northern Hemisphere based at the moment, but it seems like the focus is evenly split between Southern Ocean birds and the birds in the North Sea, the Atlantic and the Arctic. Would that be right?
Well, the focus is mainly on the Southern Hemisphere because 19 of the 22 albatross species are found in the Southern Hemisphere. There's actually only 3 albatross species found in the Northern Hemisphere, and they're only in the Pacific. So there is actually nothing in the North Sea. So surrounding where we are, you can't see any albatrosses. But there is definitely a focus on the Pacific for World Albatross Day.
Yeah, I think we can get a bit blasé about them down here in the south. I mean, when I was a kid and I had an uncle who was mad on fishing and I lived on a big bay and we'd go out fishing and it was not unusual to see shy albatross and black-browed albatross in that area. And you might get really, really lucky and, see a bull, a royal or a wandering albatross. But of course now there's all the species have been split. So I'm not really sure what I would have been looking at back then. Since I was a kid, and we're going back, 30 odd years, albatross numbers really, really took a dive soon after that. That was mainly from bycatch issues, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Bycatch and fisheries, accidental mortalities in fisheries are the prime threat that albatrosses face. And a lot of birds are killed this way every year. It's estimated that around 100,000 albatrosses are killed every year in fisheries around the world. So it is a massive, massive problem.
Now, people who have listened to earlier episodes of the Bird Emergency will be familiar with Dr. Ben Sullivan, who we interviewed. And I think Ben mentioned a staggering number. I think it was 300,000 or something from earlier estimates before the interventions to reduce bycatch became popular. How recent is that 100,000 mortality number?
So it's not only albatrosses being killed in fisheries, it's also other seabirds like petrels, for example. So I believe the 300,000 figure is for all seabirds. at a global level, and about a third of those are estimated to be albatrosses.
And what's the main method to reduce the bycatch issue?
Well, there are three main methods that can be used in longline fisheries, and they're all quite simple measures that you can use. So the first one is setting your lines at night, because if you set lines at night, birds are a lot less active, so they're not actively feeding most species, so you're much less likely to come into contact with birds. The second method is to weight the lines. So if you place a weight fairly close to the hook, that line will sink much faster, which gives birds a much smaller window of opportunity to try and take the bait from the hooks. And then the final measure is using what we call bird scaring lines, or tori lines, which is a Japanese name. And these are just lines that go out behind the boat, and they have brightly coloured streamers on them. And they just act as a deterrent to seabirds because they can see that, and it keeps them away from the dangerous area where the hooks are going into the water. So if you use all three of those things in combination, you can actually reduce bycatch by over 90%. In some cases, we've seen reductions of albatrosses killed by 99% by just using those simple measures.
And the bird scaring lines that Stephanie mentioned are also available for use on trawl vessels. So it's not only longline fisheries that are killing albatrosses and other seabirds. Trawl fishing is also a problem because albatrosses collide with the cables that are towing the net through the water at the stern of the vessel, and they break their wings, or they might be dragged underwater by these cables that are quickly moving through the water, towing the net through the water. So by using these bird scaring lines at the stern of the vessel that act like scarecrows out at sea, you can keep the birds away from the danger area where they're at risk of colliding with the trawl cables and reduce bycatch by over 90%.
Are there any fisheries that are, and we're talking in geographical and national fisheries, I guess, because that's how they're generally administered, I think. Are there any that are far advanced in their efforts to ameliorate the bycatch issue?
So the countries in which the Albatross Task Force works, which is Chile, Argentina, Brazil, South Africa, and Namibia, now all have regulations in place that require vessels to use seabird bycatch mitigation measures such as bird scaring lines. So that's a big step in the right direction. But of course, regulations are just words on paper. So what we really need to see is the fleet-wide uptake of these mitigation measures and vessels using them all the time during standard operations. And many of the fisheries we're working in are actually moving towards that. So in Namibia, for example, the demersal longline fleet we've been working in through the Albatross Task Force was estimated to be killing over 20,000 birds a year. But now, through the use of bird scaring lines on these longline vessels, we've seen a reduction in bycatch by over 95%. So we know that once these mitigation measures are being used at a fleet-wide scale, things are improving drastically.
Well, that's a massive win, isn't it? Good on you, Namibia, for getting onto that. Now, there were 3 countries that were not in that list, which I'm quite concerned about. There's actually 5 countries that I'm really concerned about, but China, Japan, and Korea, have they been invited to be involved, or are they not just not willing to participate, because they're massive operations in the Pacific?
They are, and it should just be worth saying that the Albatross Task Force, so the model of that is for countries where they're fishing, it within their EEZs, and so it's for fishers that are going out and coming back. So it's for more close to shore fisheries, and that's how that model works. So we have a completely different model for some other countries, so including some of those Asian countries like Japan and Korea, who typically those boats are going out and they can be at sea for 9 months to a year. So having the model of having Albatross Task Force instructors going into ports to talk to them just doesn't work, because the fishers are not there, they're at sea all of the time. So for those countries, we've been working with them through what's called the Regional Management Fisheries Organizations, or the RFMOs. And these are organizations that control the big tuna fisheries of the world. So there's one there's actually 2 in the Pacific. And so it's more of a top-down approach. So we'll attend these meetings, and the governments of all the countries who fish in those waters go to these meetings, and through there we've been able to push for regulations to be put in place for seabirds. So as with the Albatross Task Force now, every single tuna fishing vessel that is fishing in areas overlapping with seabirds should be using the same measures as the Albatross Task Force fisheries.
I'm a bit of a cynic, and because we're talking about China, which is like massive plunderer of the fish in the Pacific, can we have any confidence that China is taking seabird mortality seriously? If there's actually no, I mean, I can't see them letting anyone enforce any kind of regulations on them. Do we just trust that they want to do it and they will?
I think so for any country, like we can't just trust that they will start using measures as soon as an organization tells them to. So that's why it's really important that there's a good reporting system. So the way that we get reporting is through fisheries observers, so independent observers which are on each fishing vessel who are looking at what's happening, and it should include, as well as just looking at the fish catch, what's happening for seabirds. And one of the main problems that we have now is that observer coverage is very low. So typically it's between 5 to 10% of boats have an observer, and in some cases even less. So we don't have a good overall picture of what's actually happening on boats. And we've estimated for seabirds, we really need to have at least 20% to 30% coverage to be able to get a good idea of how many birds are actually being killed. So that is a gap, and it's something that we would like to see increased. The advent of having electronic monitoring, so not having to rely on human observers, is really a potential game changer for these fisheries. So in Australia, they have 100% observer coverage on their tuna boats for southern bluefin tuna, and it's all electronic. So that way you can trust the data, you can understand what's going on. So we're working with the RFMOs at the moment to try and encourage countries to increase that level. And just going back to China, actually China doesn't overlap as much with the albatross area as some other countries. So we've done some studies that have looked at seabird tracking data. So we know where the albatrosses are going because we've done so much tracking, and then we overlap that with fishing effort data, which so we can see which countries are posing the most threat to albatrosses. And for albatrosses from South Georgia Island, which is home to many thousand of albatrosses, we actually found that the key countries that are overlapping with those birds were Taiwan and Japan, because they both have very high fishing effort. So we've been doing a lot of engagement work in those countries specifically to try and help reduce bycatch, and there are some really good things happening, but there's still a way to go until we see the big reductions that we've seen with the Albatross Task Force fisheries.
Well, it's probably being a bit unfair to China by the sound of it. Now you mentioned one of the other countries that I was concerned you hadn't mentioned, and that was Australia, and it sounds like Australia is fairly well covered. The other one that I didn't hear mentioned, and I was surprised, was New Zealand. Do you know what the New Zealand fleet is doing? Even though it's pretty small by comparison with what's happening with Japan and Taiwan, obviously.
Yeah, so we should have mentioned earlier, so prior to the Albatross Task Force forming, there were a number of countries that were starting to tackle seabird bycatch. So the measures that are available now, those weren't invented by the Albatross Task Force. Other countries were already using them. So in places like South Georgia, the Falkland Islands, New Zealand, Australia, those countries started trying to solve seabird bycatch, as well as the US actually in the North Pacific. So they really pioneered the use of these measures. And so in New Zealand now, there are still some issues with seabird bycatch, but it's much smaller scale than it was. Typically, it tends to be one or two large bycatch events that occur per year, and then the rest of the time they're not really having much bycatch. But the recent pledge to have zero bycatch in New Zealand is a really positive step forward, and we hope that that's going to drive much higher use of mitigation measures, and hopefully we'll see very few birds killed in New Zealand.
And with someone like Steph Burrell continually raising the issue, I'm pretty sure that New Zealand will achieve their aim. they're pretty switched on about conservation issues nowadays.
Because these birds travel such great distances, in order to keep them safe, we need to be doing this everywhere, and fishing fleets all over the world need to be employing these measures, because if they don't, as soon as the bird crosses a border, it will be at risk of becoming bycatch. So that's why we really need to make sure it's happening everywhere.
Now, is the focus of the task force basically on fisheries and bycatch, or is the other threat of the degradation and introduced predators on their breeding islands part of your remit as well?
So the Albatross Task Force specifically works with fisheries bycatch, but the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, at which we're both based, does have restoration projects as well to remove invasive species from islands on which important seabird colonies breed. So Goth Island, which I mentioned at the beginning, where we've got field biologists working, is one of the places where we're working towards removing invasive species that are posing a big problem to our breeding albatrosses.
Don't you hate Windows 10 there, Steph?
Yeah, sorry.
I only just worked out how to turn those bloody things off too. So now the issue of the islands and whatnot is another issue for another day. How many of you are involved in the Albatross Task Force? Because it's a massive undertaking.
It is. It is. The Albatross Task Force itself, it has around 2 to 3 people based in each of the 5 countries that we're working in. So those are people working on the ground with those fisheries. And then back in Cambridge at the RSPB, working on bycatch, we've got a team of 5 of us. But that doesn't just cover albatross bycatch, that covers all seabird bycatch. And then in our wider team, there's probably another 10 people who work not only on bycatch, but they look at the threats. So they're looking at invasive species impacts, they're looking at climate change impacts, and they're doing a lot of the mapping and the tracking of seabirds as well. So there's a few of us, but it's a big problem to solve with a small team.
And if you'd like to hear from some of the albatross experts that we're working with, you can go onto the Albatross Task Force YouTube channel. We're uploading 1 talk a day for World Albatross Day, so go and check it out.
Nina, give us an idea of the kind of outreach work that you get to do being based at the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds and focusing specifically on albatross and seabirds. What, apart from what you're doing, and we'll go in detail before we sign off about what all of the activities that you've got planned for World Albatross Day are, what are some of the other outreach activities that you undertake there?
In the UK?
Well,
or generally?
Generally, with that the task force is involved with, not specifically the field work on the boats.
Yeah, so we've got, in some countries, we've got education officers that work very actively with schools, especially surrounding ports that are important for the fishing fleets we're working with. So we've got people go out into schools, primary schools, secondary schools, and tell children about the threats that albatrosses are facing and what can be done to help them. And then those kids will go home and talk to their parents that are actively involved in the fishing industry. So that's one form of outreach we do. We also engage very actively with national fisheries schools, so the kind of training programs that fishermen have to go through to be able to sail, and already there make sure that the curriculum includes sections on seabird bycatch and mitigation measures so that fishers are prepared once they head out to sea and know what they can do to stop killing seabirds. And we work very actively, as Stephanie mentioned as well, with fisheries observer agencies. So making sure that the observers that are placed on board vessels, not part of our team, but government observers, are also keeping an eye on what's happening to seabirds and reporting that accurately, so that we have a good understanding of what's happening even on the boats we're not on.
Can I ask you both, are the albatross winning the battle now? Like, have we... Because I remember I was probably a teenager when the stories were going around that the wandering albatross would probably disappear. But it seems to be a happy story with the wandering albatross. all things continuing as they are, if the islands can be looked after, the feral pests can be controlled, and the bycatch doesn't increase, hopefully we can maintain enough fish stocks in the ocean to feed all the birds. But are we winning the war, so to speak?
It's definitely a long war, and quite a lot of progress has been made. We're definitely not at the end yet. And one of the things is that because albatrosses are such long-lived species, they take a very long time to breed. So some species, they're not breeding until they're 10 years old. So for us to start to see actual increases in population, there's going to be a delay between when the birds stop being killed and when they're breeding. Because in many cases, it is the younger birds being killed. So we're losing the birds that, will be coming into the breeding cohort. So it's going to take a bit longer, but we have had some massive reductions in bycatch. So Nina mentioned Namibia before. We've had almost 20,000 birds saved a year there. We've had big reductions in South Africa. Chile and Argentina are on their way, as well as some of the other countries that took actions, much sooner. So South Georgia, Falklands, New Zealand, Australia. So we're definitely getting there. And some of the large-scale invasive removal projects that have been successful are really going to help as well. But we're not at the end yet. But I can say that, if this work wasn't done, then the population numbers would be much, much lower than they are now. So we're very slowly winning. We just need to keep going.
Yeah, exactly. And, even though we aren't seeing population increases yet, for the reasons Steph explained, what we do know is that we're saving thousands of birds a year. And that is obviously a positive thing. So we have to keep at it.
The Albatross Task Force is a great initiative. I was really unaware that it existed until I saw the activity on Twitter today. I was aware, obviously, of the seabird groups around the world. I don't know if either of you want to talk about the other great threat. That's plastics.
Yeah, sure. So plastics is a very emotive topic for a lot of people. And I think for many people in the last couple of years, it's really come to the forefront of everyone's minds because there's been so much press about it. And also it's something that you can visualize yourself because you see yourself throwing away countless, items of plastic. So it's something that's really tangible for everyone to think about. And I'm sure everybody's seen the images from some of the Pacific Islands of the albatross chicks that are dead with lots of plastic on the island. I've actually been there and seen it for myself. And it is quite heartbreaking to see. But at the moment, there just isn't the evidence that plastics are having an impact on albatrosses at a population level. So even on those specific islands, plastics hasn't yet been proven to actually be a threat to the population because birds, specifically albatrosses, their natural food does have big parts in it. So like squid beaks. And so they're used to having undigestible parts fed to them, which they'll then regurgitate. So with most plastics, that's possible. You do get occasions where that isn't possible and birds will die. And so at the moment, we're trying to focus our efforts on the threats that we know are the main ones. So we know that 95% of albatross species are threatened by bycatch. We know that around 65% of albatrosses are threatened by invasive species. So we're focusing our efforts on those areas. And it's not to say that in the future we won't turn our efforts to plastics, but it's a huge worldwide problem, and it's very hard to know what tangible actions we can take. Because when we're working with fishers, using simple measures, we can solve the problem practically overnight. Whereas with plastics, it's going to be decades of worldwide change that, as a small team of 20, we're not going to be able to have that huge impact that we can with bycatch.
If the evidence isn't in that it's making any kind of effect at a population level, well, then obviously the research needs to continue, but for you guys to be putting resources into it seems like, yeah, just don't do it. I think that's obvious. So with the activities that are planned, what are they specifically? How can people who want to help albatrosses get involved?
Okay, yeah, so today for World Albatross Day, we are hosting a live question and answer session with some of the Albatross experts from our team and from other organizations we work with. So we will have speakers from the Albatross Task Force, from eradication projects, and many other people working with albatross conservation in different ways all across the globe. So you can join in. It's a Zoom call. I'm sure the link can be shared in this podcast, or follow Albatross Task Force on social media. You'll be able to find all the details there, and come and ask questions. Come and learn as much as you can about what is being done to save albatrosses around the world and how you can help.
Now, Nina, can you tell us when the first session is, what the time is in which time zone, and then people can work it out from there?
Yeah, so it's only one Q&A session, but the talks from the experts are already on YouTube, so you can go and listen to them even if you can't attend the session itself. It's happening on the 19th of June at 12 o'clock UK time.
So that's BST.
Yeah.
Greenwich Standard Time, yeah?
No, it's BST.
Oh.
12 BST. It's an hour different. So is that 11 GMT, Nina?
Okay.
I think so, yeah. I think it's 11 GMT. So all you have to do is come and ask our Albatross experts questions and learn as much as you can. And also follow us on social media so that you can stay up to date with the work we're doing and how you can get involved.
So Nina and Steph are going to, immediately we stop talking, they're going to email me the links that I need and the social handles that I need, and they'll be in the show notes for this episode. If you are in the Australian Eastern Standard Time Zone, where Greenwich Mean Time plus 11, I think it is, plus or minus. So it's actually World Albatross Day in Australia now, but the activities are tomorrow, when it will be World Albatross Day yesterday, which will be now when the podcast goes out. How about that?
But the session will also be recorded, so if you can't come to the live session, just follow us on YouTube.
Yep. Now, we won't try and read out those links, but the YouTube channel is the Albatross Task Force. That's just it, is it? Okay,
yeah.
Fantastic. Well, because we've got two of you here, I'm not going to go through all of my standard bird emergency questions, but for each of you, actually, I'm going to ask you the three of our standard questions. I'll start with you, Steph. Your favourite place to go looking at birds?
It's a tough one because I've been to some pretty nice places for birds, but I'd have to say Midway Atoll, which is in the Pacific, so it's at the end of the Hawaiian chain, and I spent 6 weeks there last year, and it's just an absolute wildlife spectacle for albatrosses and petrels. It's amazing. So if you can ever get there, I'd recommend it.
It's on my bucket list. Now, you've been there, so I want to know if you went to Guam as well.
I didn't, no. It was just a trip to Midway, so I was volunteering there on a census of all the albatross nests, but Guam would also be a pretty cool place to go see some birds.
Yeah, I want to knock them both off on a trip and go to Japan and Korea. So saving donations gladly accepted. How about you, Nina?
A lot less exotic, but I lived in Scotland for a few years, and I have to say Isle of May is one of my favourite places. You get lots of puffins and nice seabirds there, so if anyone ever gets a chance, I recommend it.
Now, is that in the Faroes?
No, it's just off the coast of Scotland, east coast.
Okay. Okay.
Not very far at all.
Yep. Fantastic. Favourite bird, Nina?
I love the grey-headed albatross, hands down. It's just beautiful, really impressive, and just, yeah.
That's easy.
Nothing beats it.
How about you, Steph?
Oh, I think I have to go for the wandering albatross. I spent a few years working with them, and of all the albatrosses, they just have the most personality, and it probably sound a bit strange, but it feels like you can actually have more of a relationship with a wandering albatross than the others, because they will have such distinct personalities, and they're just wonderful to work with.
Because we leapt straight into task force discussion, I didn't really find out what your backgrounds are. So you're a researcher, academic in your own right, Steph?
I wouldn't quite go as far as saying that, but earlier in my career, I spent a few years working for the British Antarctic Survey, who do all of the monitoring of albatrosses and other species down on South Georgia Islands and some of the other islands around Antarctica. So I was very much a field worker. So I was collecting lots of data on their breeding success, the populations of albatrosses. And through doing that work, it really highlighted to me firsthand the massive declines that had occurred. So when I finally came back to the UK, working with the Albatross Task Force and within our marine program was the only thing that I really wanted to do, because I wanted to try and mitigate against some of those massive declines that I'd seen.
Have we seen Steph published?
A little bit, but not very much. I'm more of a field worker than an academic, so I like getting my hands dirty in the field. And then now I'm much more of a policy person, so trying to work to change things from the high policy level rather than writing papers about things.
How about you, Nina? DaRocha et al.?
Not yet, but maybe soon. So I come from more of a marine conservation and fisheries background. So I worked on turtle bycatch in Brazil before joining the Albatross Task Force. So wasn't a birder, but have become a convert.
Okay, well, you're a confessed birder. So what's your field guide of choice?
Oh my God. I'm going to have to pass. I don't know.
Really? You don't have one that you throw in your bag when you're off on a trip?
I have a few different ones, but I have none of them with me here right now, so I wouldn't know. Sorry.
Oh, wow, you're the first person who's not been able to answer the field guide question. How about you, Steph?
I think as we're talking about albatrosses, I'd probably say for them the best field guide would be Albatrosses, Petrels, and Shearwaters of the world. So that if you're going to go out looking for albatrosses, then I definitely recommend that. And then I think, from a UK perspective, then the Collins Bird Guide, so birds of the UK and Ireland is probably the key one. And I'm sure that's the one Nina will have as well at home. I
was kind of expecting that one, although I know that now Nina at the moment is in Portugal. And if you've both been working in South America and the Southern Hemisphere, there could be any number of guides that you need on a boat in the Southern Hemisphere.
Yeah, the Albatross one covers them all, though. So go for them.
That's great. Thanks for doing this at such short notice. I'm glad that we're going to get the opportunity to put the word out. So, Nina, again, what time can people attend the Q&A?
So 12 o'clock UK time BST. I believe that is 11 o'clock GMT.
And that's AM.
Yeah.
Yes.
If you're on my side of the world, just look it up on YouTube, Albatross Task Force. So that's great. Thanks so much for reaching out and good luck with it. And I hope that we can talk again when World Albatross Day rolls around and you'll have more and more good news to share about the reduction in bycatch. I feel a bit guilty. I was saying the bycatch issue. Now, we got to be fair income. It's dead birds caught on hooks. It's not an issue. It's death. Let's stop it.
Yeah, thanks, Grant. No, it certainly is more than an issue. It's a disaster for seabirds, and that's why ACAP have started this World Albatross Day to highlight the conservation crisis we're facing. But thanks for your time and happy World Albatross Day.
Thanks, Grant. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bird Emergency. It's going to be a double header. World Albatross Day and then the Tegan Douglas episode will follow along shortly after you've listened to this one. Ciao.